The capture of Jerusalem's Temple Mount 50 years ago sent shockwaves throughout the Jewish world. It also raised hopes among some for the building of the Third Temple. On June 7, 1967, Israeli Brigade Commander Mothe Gur made an announcement the Jews had waited to hear for some 2,000 years. Retaking this ground was important for a number of reasons. For one, it's where King Solomon built the first Jewish temple. After the Babylonians destroyed it, Zerubbabel laid the foundation stone for a second temple that was later expanded by King Herod. It fell at the hands of the Romans in 70 AD. When Commander Gur declared that the Temple Mount was back in Jewish hands, it rekindled hope for a long-awaited Third Temple.
The Six-Day War was a miracle of biblical proportions, and was a cataclysmic opening of a new era for Israel and for the whole world.
Rabbi Chaim Richman of the Temple Institute is dedicated to rebuilding the Jewish temple. He sees the time since the Six-Day War as a prophetic shift.
It would be hard, I think, not to see what's happened in the past 50 years as a tremendous jumpstart, a tremendous fast forward. It's more than prophetic. It's like a kiss from heaven, you know, it's like a divine kiss. It's an intimate brush with the reality of God's compassion and love, and He keeps His promises.
The Institute shares a key connection to the battle for Jerusalem. Its founder, Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, served with the 55th Paratrooper Brigade that captured the Temple Mount. After the victory, a Jordanian guide gave them a remarkable tour.
His job was to carry the company machine gun. There's a very beautiful photograph of that. He actually, the first night of the liberation of Jerusalem, he was given the task of guarding over the spot of the Dome of the Rock, which of course we believe is the Holy of Holies. The story, though, that he told us is that the soldiers were on the Temple Mount, and it was just like the first hour or so. And they were approached by a Jordanian fellow in Western dress who explained that he was the official tour guide for the Jordanian parliament, and he offered to take the soldiers and show them the sights on the Temple Mount. And he takes the soldiers, you know, the rabbi there, and he says, well, this is exactly where the sanctuary stood. This is where the altar stood, and then this is where the menorah stood. He tells them all these things about the history of the Holy Temple. Finally, the rabbi asked him, why are you telling us all this? And he said, well, we have a tradition from our fathers, they from their fathers, that one day the Jews would wage a war and conquer this mountain and rebuild the Holy Temple. And I assume that you're starting tomorrow. And I want this to be my part in helping you.
What was their reaction to that story?
Well, gosh, I guess they were pretty surprised, but the bottom line is, in hindsight, it doesn't look like we were ready.
50 years later, that's changed, with the Temple Institute preparing blueprints and gathering official temple elements, such as the priestly garments. Richmond is also dispelling myths about the temple on today's digital loudspeaker, YouTube.
Let's start at the beginning. What was the Holy Temple really all about?
All of this means talk of rebuilding the temple is no longer considered a fringe idea.
Today, there is a lobby in the Knesset of how many members of Knesset that are constantly speaking about Jewish rights to pray on the Temple Mount. There are members of Knesset that actually talk about the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. Do you understand that 20 years ago, these people wouldn't have been given a moment on prime time television in Israel to say these things? They would have been laughed out.
So, a few years ago, this was considered fringe?
Zealots, lunatics, peculiar. Today it's mainstream.
One of those members is Yehuda Glick.
10 years ago, there was not a single member of Knesset who ascended Temple Mount. Today, we have 20 of the Knesset members who are interested in ascending Temple Mount, praying on the Temple Mount, and are part in the battle for the redemption of the Temple Mount and for bringing the Temple Mount back into the center of the next step in the redemption process.
Richmond sees the temple through the eyes of the prophet Isaiah, who wrote 3,000 years ago that God's house would be a house of prayer for all nations.
It means basically that there's a God in the world and that the best is yet to come, and that we are so connected to him and to each other and to that purpose and to all humanity. And it's just a wonderful privilege to be here with you today, to be looking out over Jerusalem and to realize that we're living in probably the most important time in history. If you believe in the God of Israel and you see his hand on his people and you understand the tremendous changes that have gone on over the years, you see that the one who brought us this far isn't finished and will keep his promises.
Inside the world's newest skyscraper, the 5th tallest building in the world, tests are underway on the world's newest way to shop. Once a customer has pre-registered, linking a credit or debit card to a scan of their hand, all that's needed in future to pay for products and leave the store is another scan of the hand.
It's a verification and payment system. It uses the unique patterns of blood vessels on people's hands. Everyone's patterns are different.
They call it BioPay. Shop staff, the retailer says, need not be worried about it taking their jobs. This, it says, frees them for better jobs.
They can do more valuable work, like, for example, store management and the product management like that.
Would shop cashiers agree? There were none here to ask. This is a prototype store, at the moment open only to people working in the Lotte World Tower. About 1,000 of them are registered so far, but when this building fills, it's only just opened, they'll test the technology here on 5,000 people. The plan then is to roll the technology out across South Korea later this year and worldwide after that.
Gunmen in Egypt have attacked a group of Coptic Christians as they headed to a monastery, killing at least 26 people and wounding 25 others, according to the authorities. The attackers, wearing masks, reportedly pulled up in 3 vehicles and stopped the 2 buses and a truck in which the Christians were travelling before opening fire. It's the latest in a series of deadly attacks on Egypt's Coptic Christians, who make up about 10% of the population. The ambush happened on a road leading to the monastery of St. Samuel the Confessor in Minya province. Security forces launched a hunt for the gunmen, setting up dozens of checkpoints and patrols. State media said Egyptian President al-Sisi called a security meeting. The Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, the country's centre of Islamic learning, said the attack was intended to destabilise the country. About 70 people have been killed since December in bomb attacks on churches in several cities. The so-called Islamic State claimed responsibility.
Egypt has carried out airstrikes in neighbouring Libya, targeting jihadist training camps. The authorities say the 6 strikes at sites near the eastern Libyan city of Derna were in retaliation for an attack in southern Egypt on Friday.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has warned that states who sponsor what he calls terrorism will be punished, and that Egypt will not hesitate to carry out more airstrikes.
What we have seen today will not be left without a response. The training camps for these elements, as I speak to you, are being bombarded with a massive strike. Egypt will never hesitate to strike the terrorist camps anywhere.
Armed groups, some of whom are affiliated with ISIL, have been increasing attacks against security forces in the Sinai Peninsula since 2013. The government says the aim of the military operation there and in Libya is to defeat armed groups that are trying to destabilize the country. But attacks like this show security is still a major challenge.
The president is also saying this morning that the #1 item on the agenda at today's G7 meeting is terrorism.
On the final day of his foreign tour, the president dove into the issue of migration, one of the most contentious topics for the Trump administration, but at the very top of the European agenda. Refugees have flooded the shores of Europe, and leaders want to find a way to stem that tide of migrants seeking opportunities and fleeing violence in Africa and the Middle East. President Trump wants to stay focused on terrorism. In a statement, he called the attack on a bus in Egypt yesterday, which killed 28 Coptic Christians, proof that, quote, terrorists are engaged in a war against civilization, and the bloodletting of Christians must end, and all who aid their killers must be punished. In response, Egypt's president ordered airstrikes to be carried out in nearby Libya and said he anticipates more help from the U.S. G7 leaders signed a memorandum Friday pledging to combat terrorist recruitment online and restrict movement of foreign fighters.
World leaders in Sicily have failed to agree On climate change, as Donald Trump says he will withdraw the U.S. from the landmark Paris Climate Accord that seeks to stem the effects of global warming. The rift is one of several emerging disagreements between the U.S. president and other world leaders. The Paris Climate Agreement aims to limit temperature increases by only 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. To remain in the deal, the U.S. must cut its emissions by 26% by the year 2025. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Italian Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni had hoped to use the summit to convince Donald Trump to adjust or soften some of his stances.
We spoke with the United States and made our argument clear that we are in favor of the U.S. continuing to back the climate agreement.
I think the United States is considering its position in relation to these matters and what its policy is going to be.
We are confident that after this internal reflection, the United States will also want to participate in it, as they obviously hold a fundamental role.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has declined a request to host an event for Ramadan, two U.S. officials said, apparently breaking a tradition in place with few exceptions for nearly 20 years. Since 1999, Republican and Democratic secretaries of state have nearly always hosted either an iftar dinner to break the day's fast during Ramadan or a reception marking the Eid al-Fitr holiday at the end of the month at the State Department. Tillerson turned down a request from the State Department's Office of Religion and Global Affairs to host the Eid al-Fitr reception as part of Ramadan celebrations, said two U.S. officials.
Prime Minister Theresa May has lowered Britain's terror threat level from critical to severe. This after British police made two more arrests in connection with the deadly bombing attack at the Manchester Arena.
Police overnight raided another home in Manchester and arrested two men as British authorities said they've rounded up the majority of the arena bombers' known associates. Counter-terror chief Mark Rowley.
They're very significant, these arrests. We're very happy we've got our hands around some of the key players that we're concerned about. Let's say there's still a little bit more to do.
Searches are still taking place at a handful of locations around the city. Of the people arrested, all of them are men between the ages of 18 and 38. As this investigation continues, several key questions linger. Did attacker Salman Abedi receive help making his bomb? Were more explosives produced? And are there plans for another attack? This ongoing investigation is now the backdrop for a busy holiday weekend with heightened security nationwide. Athletes from around the world are in town competing in the Great City Games and Great Manchester Run, a half marathon scheduled for tomorrow.
At its heart, the job of the police is to protect the public. This weekend, that's particularly important. Whatever events you're going to, whether you're going shopping or you're going to sporting events or music events or whatever this weekend, I'd encourage the public to carry on.
On Saturday, in an attempt to end a siege in the Philippines' southern city of Marawi, which has raged for 5 days, the country's armed forces helicopters fired rockets at Islamist militants. The heavy firepower was the first time it was used because officials were confident that Isnalan Hapilon, the leader of the Islamic State-inspired fighters, was located in the city. Major General Carlito Galvez, who heads the military command in the western Mindanao region, said the main purpose of the offensive is to suppress the lawlessness and to maintain normalcy in Marawi so that our people here, our countrymen, can return, especially by Ramadan. Ramadan is the Islamic month of fasting and prayer, which began on Saturday and has significance in the majority Muslim population in the Catholic country.
The Russian Defense Ministry source says that Kurdish forces have allowed ISIL to open a corridor to flee the besieged city of Raqqa. Russian special forces have apparently started an operation, though, to prevent the terrorists from leaving the area.
According to a source in the Russian Defense Ministry, Russia opposes any gathering of forces outside of the city, and any terrorists that flee Raqqa will be destroyed. According to a source, once again, already 120 ISIL fighters have been killed. Those who are trying to escape from Raqqa. And reportedly, all Russian military forces in Syria are now in full combat alert. Now, that means that unmanned aerial vehicles will be on duty 24 hours a day. Now, Russian Special Operation Forces are reportedly taking part in the operation as well, and those, as we know, are tasked with identifying terrorist locations, their headquarters, and that information is in turn given to Russian warplanes who strike terrorist targets. Now, the city of Palmyra is also very important to terrorists, as they have been kicked out of there twice so far during this Syrian campaign.
Elsewhere in Syria, the army is pressing ahead with its offensive to fully dislodge Daesh terrorists from the war-ravaged country. The army and allied forces are advancing towards the Jordanian border.
The Syrian army is making fresh gains against foreign-backed militants near the country's border with Jordan, that straddles Iraq. In the latest developments on the battlefield, government forces have clawed back nearly 5,000 square kilometers from the terrorists in the south and east of Homs province. Tensions flared up in the southern region last week when the U.S.-led coalition mounted an airstrike against pro-government forces in Baida. U.S. officials claimed the convoy posed a threat to its allied forces in the area and that the Syrian army seemed to be transporting militias to Al Tanf garrison near the Jordanian border, where British and U.S. commandos have been training anti-Syria militants. Reports coming out of Syria suggest that Washington and its allies are consolidating their grip on the area for a possible ground invasion. The Syrian forces' rapid advance towards the border with Jordan is believed to prevent the U.S.-backed forces' possible advance towards Deir az-Zor.
And Iran's foreign minister says a massive arms deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia will be unable to bring peace to the Middle East. Now, Mohammad Javad Zarif made that remark in an article published in the New York Times. He also said responsible leaders in the world should step up efforts and tackle the momentous challenges at hand to avoid the spread of terrorism and militant extremism. He added that the $110 billion deal between Riyadh and Washington will not reduce the burden on American military, or as the State Department put it, will not support long-term security of Saudi Arabia. Iran's foreign minister underlined that last time that Riyadh spent such a large sum was back in the 1980s when it gave Iraq's former dictator Saddam Hussein billions of dollars to arm itself against Iran.
Estonia is expelling 2 Russian diplomats from Moscow's consulate in the northeast of the Baltic state. Maria Finoshina has more details on this.
What we know for sure so far is that the 2 senior Russian diplomats have been ordered to leave Estonia earlier on Friday, and that was confirmed to RT by the Russian embassy in this Baltic country as well as by Estonia's foreign ministry. Both added that they cannot give any further information. So the reasons so far are still unclear. The Russian foreign ministry told RT that they consider this decision, quotation, yet another unfriendly and absolutely groundless act, and they also promised that this will not go unanswered. I have to say that the relations between Russia and Estonia, one of the former Soviet republics, have in fact never been easy, but it is really at this point hard to say without speculating what exactly was behind this particular decision. So we have to wait and see.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
For the first time ever, the U.S. is testing how its missile defense system might do against an intercontinental ballistic missile, aka the type of nuclear missile North Korea is racing to develop. The U.S. is planning to launch a mock-up of an ICBM from the Marshall Islands and hit it mid-flight with an interceptor missile launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. The test has been planned for a while and wasn't intended to be a reaction to North Korea's increasingly frequent missile tests. Between launch and impact, an ICBM spends most of its time traveling through the vacuum of space. That's the mid-course of its flight, and it's the best time to crash an interceptor missile into the ICBM and blow it up harmlessly. By the end of the year, the U.S. will have 44 of these ground-based mid-course defense interceptors in place. There's just one problem. They're not very reliable. The missile defense system has been tested 17 times since 1999 against non-ICBM types of targets. It's missed the mark 8 times, largely due to technical errors. But it'll probably still be a while before North Korea develops an ICBM. It's still testing medium-range missiles, which usually have a maximum range of up to 1,900 miles.
Russia's making moves to clamp down on social media groups that lure in vulnerable people online after a trend of so-called suicide games. The lower house of parliament has now passed a new law.
The Russian authorities have introduced a new criminal penalty, a prison term of up to 6 years for individuals or groups who lure or assist youngsters, minors, to commit suicide. And this can come in the form of persuasion, bribery, fraud, or providing tools or advice or information that aims to present suicide in an attractive light.
And why introduce this law now? Because these games have been going on for quite some time, haven't they?
Well, it all started with this controversial investigative report published by the Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta. They were the one who broke the stories about these alleged suicide groups that started to emerge on Russian social media. And what these groups do, reportedly, is lure youngsters to commit suicide in the form of a personal challenge game. And according to this report, between November 2015 and April 2016, up to 130 youngsters died as a result of these suicide groups.
Germany is expected to pass a law next week which aims to improve vaccination rates in the country. On May 26, the health ministry said the country will pass a proposed law allowing kindergartens to notify authorities if parents don't talk to their doctors about vaccinating their children. The health minister said the proposed law is a response to recent increases in measles cases in Germany. Parents can already be fined €2,500 for not talking to doctors about the issue, but authorities didn't always know which parents were avoiding the talk. Parents don't have to vaccinate their children by law in Germany, at least not yet. They just have to be informed. Italy, on the other hand, now requires parents to vaccinate their children. The country acted in response to a jump in measles cases in recent years. Germany is expected to enact the proposed law June 1st.
According to station employees, two government officials often stand watch over the antennas of TV news network Globovision, poised to take it off the air if regulators object to coverage of anti-government protests. They said the 24-hour Venezuelan news station receives regular warnings from state telecom regulator Conatel against showing live footage of clashes between anti-government protesters and security forces or broadcasting terms such as dictatorship and repression. In contrast to past waves of unrest in Venezuela, the nation's three main private television stations have provided minimal live coverage of the latest anti-government demonstrations. They rarely show more than a few minutes of real-time images of protests. However, the private networks, including Globovision, do give broadly equal weight to opposition and government leaders and supporters in broadcasts, contrary to assertions by critics that they muzzle the opposition. Ruling Socialist Party officials scoff at the idea of any censorship, insisting the government is the victim of a U.S.-supported campaign by private, local, and international media to depict it as a repressive regime and thus justify a coup.
Swollen rivers burst their banks, sending floodwater cascading through towns and villages in southwestern Sri Lanka. At least 100 people have been killed, and authorities warn it's not over yet.
The water level in the Kalinia River is increasing. Those who live in low-lying areas are advised to move to safer ground.
More than 60,000 people have been forced to flee their homes to escape the rising waters. In a cruel twist, the land which just weeks ago was cracking with drought is now dangerously unstable, mudslides destroying anything in their path. Deforestation has made the situation worse. Farmland is less able to withstand heavy rainfalls. It's the worst flooding the country has seen since 2003, which killed 250 people and destroyed 10,000 homes. The country tried to be prepared, as it is monsoon season, but as the rain started overnight on Thursday, and by the time evacuation warnings went out, for many, it was too late. Sri Lanka issued an international appeal for help, and aid has started to arrive, but those living downstream of major rivers are being warned. The worst could still be yet to come.